The night pressed heavy over Hollow Creek, thick with heat that clung like smoke, mingling with the scent of liquor and sweat inside the sundown saloon. Ceiling fans turned slow, stirring up more dust than air. The scrape of boots on wooden floors, the clink of glasses, the hoarse laughter of men too drunk to care, all merged into a weary, rough symphony. In the kitchen corner, Mara Ellison wiped the sweat from her brow. Her dark skin gleamed under the lamplight, her hair tied back, her apron dusted with flour and grease. She had been in Hollow Creek for 2 weeks, working as a cook's helper for Mr. Glay, a kind but practical man. "Cook well and stay quiet," he had said. "They'll leave you be." She had believed him, until tonight. Curtis Malloy sat at the third table, waving a bottle, his grin uneven. 3 whiskeys in, and he'd turned into the kind of man every woman learns to avoid. When Mara brought out the tray, he caught her wrist. "Hey now, pretty thing," he slurred. "Don't hide in that kitchen. Come sit with me. I'll show you what fun looks like." The tray slipped. Glass shattered. Whiskey splashed across the floor. Mara tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. She could feel the sour heat of his breath, hear the snickers of the men nearby. No one moved. Even the bartender lowered his head, pretending to polish a glass. "Let go." Her voice was rough, low, but sharp enough to draw a few glances. Curtis chuckled darkly. "Let go? I will. Once you agree to come upstairs with me." And then, the saloon door creaked open. The room shifted with the gust of hot wind that followed. A man stepped in, Grant Holloway. Dust clung to his coat, a black hat shadowed his eyes, his shoulders broad enough to stop the wind. He paused in the doorway, gaze sweeping the room before he moved to a table near the back. Mara had never seen him before, but something in that steady look made her freeze. Curtis still tugged at her, his voice thick with drink. She didn't think, she just acted. She tore her hand free, spun around, and ran toward the stranger. He looked up as she reached him. Her breath came fast, heart hammering against her ribs. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "Can you pretend to be my man for one night?" The saloon went silent. Every eye turned their way. Grant's face was half in shadow, the lamplight cutting across a jaw rough with stubble, eyes the color of cold ash. She still clutched his sleeve, her hand trembling, skin warm against the dusted fabric of his shirt. Behind her, Curtis's boots scraped the floor. "What the hell's this?" he snarled. "Who's she calling her man?" Grant rose slowly. His shadow swallowed the light. For a long second, he said nothing, only looked. That look alone was enough to make the air thicken. "She's with me," he said at last, quiet, calm, and absolute. Curtis stopped short. The lamplight caught, the twitch in his grin before he forced a laugh. "Fine. Not worth a fight over a kitchen girl." He raised his hands in mock surrender and backed away, his laughter fading into the murmur of the crowd. Grant didn't move until the door shut behind him. Then he lowered his gaze to her hand and gently pulled free. Mara's cheeks burned. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I just didn't know what else to do." He nodded, his voice steady but not unkind. "Don't be sorry. Everyone needs saving sometimes." She stepped back, clutching her apron. The bartender was back to his glasses, the others whispering again. Between her and the stranger, Silence hung, thick as the heat. "Thank you," she breathed. Grant said nothing more. He sat again, eyes drifting toward the window, where the night still burned hot and restless. Mara slipped back to the kitchen, her steps uneven. Her heart had not yet slowed. But beneath the trembling, something strange stirred, a fragile sense of safety she hadn't felt in years. She had only wanted peace. But when she touched that man's arm, Mara Ellison had awakened something deeper, something she thought had died with her past. Morning came to Hollow Creek on a dry wind that carried the scent of burnt grass and fresh coffee. Sunlight slid through the cracked sign of the Sundown Saloon, washing everything in that lazy gold the West was known for. Inside, the air was different. No more hoarse laughter, no shattered glass, no staggering footsteps. Only the clatter of a knife on the chopping board, the soft ring of dishes, and the raspy voice of Mr. Glay drifting from behind the counter. Mara Ellison carried a tray down the row of tables, morning light tracing the warmth on her cheek. She'd barely slept. The memory of her hand clutching the sleeve of that stranger still burned clear. She could still feel the warmth of it, the kind that didn't come from whiskey or fire, but from a man. The saloon door creaked open. A familiar silhouette stepped inside. Grant Holloway. His coarse shirt still bore the dust of the trail, and his boots left dry prints on the floorboards. He nodded at a few customers before walking up to the counter. "Your man from last night's back," Mr. Glay said, loud enough for everyone to hear, his tone laced with mischief. Mara froze mid-step. The tray trembled, spilling a few drops of coffee. Her cheeks flushed hot. "What did you say?" she whispered, trying, and failing, to hide the shy curve of her mouth. Glay shrugged, a grin hiding under his gray mustache. "I said he saved you. Around here, a man does something decent, and folks will start calling it love." Grant only gave a small smile. "I just came to say hello. Heard your place is still as busy as ever." "Busy, noisy, and full of gossip. Nothing's changed," Glay replied. He poured coffee and set the cup down. "Sit, son. On the house." Grant shook his head. "No need." "Wasn't me offering," Glay teased. "Your girlfriend in the kitchen made the batch." Behind the door, Mara nearly dropped the ladle. Girlfriend. The word struck like a hammer, not painful, but enough to throw her heartbeat off rhythm. She pressed a hand to her chest, exhaled slowly, then steadied herself. She wiped her hands on her apron, lifted a plate, and stepped out. Fried eggs, buttered bread, a side of bacon, the scent of comfort itself. "Breakfast," she said softly, setting the plate before him. Grant looked up. Their eyes met for the first time in daylight. No fear now, no rush, only a quiet awkwardness, like two people unsure what to do with what was left between them. "Thank you," he said. His voice was low, steady, but something in it made her turn away. She poured his coffee. "I owe you for last night." Grant tilted his head. "Nothing to owe." She smiled faintly. In a place like this, sometimes nothing is the biggest debt of all. He didn't answer. The spoon tapped lightly against the plate, the sound thin as breath. Mara lingered a moment, unsure whether to stay or leave. The light through the window caught her hair, mingling with the scent of coffee and smoke. Grant finally spoke. "You been working here long?" "Just got here," she said. 2 weeks, cooking till I figure out what's next." "What's next?" she shrugged. Don't know yet. Maybe stay, maybe move on. I just need quiet for a while. He studied her, then nodded. I get that. She looked up, caught his eyes again, and saw it there. The same weight, the same calm understanding that didn't need words. The bell above the door jingled. More customers came in, trailing dust and laughter. Mara bowed her head and slipped back toward the kitchen. Before the door swung shut, she heard Grant say to Glay, "She cooks real good." His tone was even, quiet, but enough for Mara to hear. Inside, she stopped, one hand over her heart. It beat faster than before, unsure whether it was fear, relief, or something else quietly growing between them. Warm, steady, alive. That morning, no one spoke of the night before. But between the sound of ladles and knives and the scent of coffee, something had changed. It was no longer the silence of strangers, but the silence of two souls beginning to listen to each other's breath. Noon drifted through Hollow Creek in that slow, dusty rhythm of a small western town. The dry wind carried the scent of burning pine and the soft rattle of wagon wheels down the road. Inside the sundown saloon, the air was dim and still. The crackle of the stove, the haze of light through dusty glass, the quiet hum of a day that had nowhere to be. Mara Ellison stood at the sink, her hands buried in soapy water, her mind miles away, still circling around the man who had sat at the counter that morning. He had said little, but his eyes, heavy, still, clung to her like a thin curl of smoke that refused to fade. As she wiped the last dish dry, she caught the sound of Mr. Glay talking out front, his voice carrying over the counter. "Grant Holloway. Strange fella. You'd think a man that hard couldn't break. Turns out, he got left at the altar." The plate slipped in her hands. "Left?" she echoed quietly. Glay looked up, a little surprised. "You didn't hear? Bride ran off the night before the wedding. Pretty, educated, rich, said he didn't know how to love right. Poor man. Then again, maybe she wasn't wrong. Some folks don't want a love that quiet." Mara said nothing. She dried her hands on her apron. A man left behind for being too silent. It felt familiar somehow. She remembered what her own family had told her, that she needed a husband who talked more, stood taller, looked whiter. By nightfall, the sky had deepened to indigo. The saloon windows glowed faintly from the lamps inside. Mara gathered the trash from the kitchen and stepped out into the back alley. The air was cooler there, smelling faintly of smoke and pine ash. A faint click, the sound of a match. Grant Holloway sat on the wooden steps beside the trash bin, a half-burned cigarette glowing between his fingers. The light from it caught the silver dust on his shoulders. When he noticed her, he simply nodded. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Don't feel like it." She set the trash down, wiping her hands. "Didn't take you for a smoker." "Not usually," he said, voice low and rough from the night air. "Only when I've got something to forget." Silence hung between them. Far off, a dog barked toward the open plains. Mara sat down a few feet away, rubbing her arms against the chill. "I heard Mr. Glay talking," she said quietly. "About you and the woman." He didn't look at her. Smoke drifted from his lips. "He talks plenty." "If you don't want to, it's fine," he said, cutting her off gently. "Nothing to hide. She left the night before the wedding." He gave a small, dry smile. Said I didn't love her loud enough. Mara looked at him, most of his face lost to shadow, only his eyes catching the faint light. Tired eyes, but honest. "And what do you think?" she asked softly. "I think love doesn't need noise," he said. "I woke early, fixed the porch, kept my word. Thought that was enough. Guess she wanted something people could see." Mara was quiet for a while. "I was told the man they made me marry did it out of love." He turned to her. "Made you marry?" She nodded. "They said he had land, a name, safety. They said, 'Mara, this is how we protect you.' But it felt more like they sold me." Grant crushed the cigarette under his boot. "What did you do?" She smiled faintly. "I ran. Took a sack of flour, $18, and a pair of borrowed shoes. Caught the night train. When the fields turned dry, I got off. That was here, Hollow Creek." He looked toward the shadowed rooftops in the distance. "Took guts to do that." "No," she said. "It was fear. I was scared that if I stayed, I'd disappear from myself." For a while they sat in silence, listening to the wind weave through the tin roof. Then, wordlessly, Grant slipped off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. She froze, glancing up. "You don't have to—" "I do," he said simply. "It's cold." Her smile trembled, eyes bright with something she couldn't name. Two people, both left behind, sat together in that narrow alley, sharing the same quiet, as if it were a secret. When Mara finally stood, she whispered, "They say silence kills love." Grant's voice was low, barely more than breath. "Maybe. But sometimes silence is where it begins." She walked back inside, the coat still warm around her, carrying the scent of smoke and wind. That night, Hollow Creek lay in a peace too deep to break. And in that peace, something new had begun to breathe. That afternoon, the wind rose from the plains carrying the scent of distant rain and damp soil. The sundown saloon was quieter than usual. Sunlight slanted through the windows, sweeping across the dark wooden tables, catching the dust that shimmered like faint mist. Behind the counter, Mr. Glay sat reading a letter, his hands trembling slightly. When he finished, he exhaled hard and pulled off his spectacles. From the kitchen doorway, Mara watched the lines around his mouth deepen. "Bad news?" she asked softly. He looked up. "My mother's ill, back east. I need to leave for a few weeks, maybe longer." She froze. "And the saloon?" He managed a weak smile. "That's what I was just thinking about." Right then, the familiar sound of boots echoed through the room. Grant Holloway stepped in, brushing dust off his coat, giving a brief nod in greeting. Glay's face lit up with something close to relief. "You're just in time, Grant. What's happened?" "I need someone to watch the place while I'm gone," Glay said, slow and steady. "There's no one I'd trust more than you." Grant frowned, his gray eyes catching the amber light from outside. "I was only planning to pass through." "Then stay a few weeks," Glay replied. "You don't need to charm anyone. Just keep the books, count stock, watch over the crew. You can do that." "You know I'm not good with people." "All the better," Glay said with a chuckle. "Talkers usually break things here." Behind the curtain, Mara listened, her pulse quickening. She didn't know why. Maybe because he'd be staying. Maybe because the thought of him being there, in the same place under the same roof, sent a small ripple through her chest, like water touched by wind. By sundown, Glay had packed his bags, given his instructions, and turned to Grant. "You know what to do, I'll write when I can. And you, Mara, you take your orders from Grant till I'm back. Kitchen, supplies, everything." She nodded, hiding a faint smile. "And try not to burn the place down," he added, half joking, before stepping into the gold-dusted evening. That night, for the first time, Grant Holloway took the seat of the man in charge. He spoke little, checked the ledgers, organized the shelves, and made sure the doors closed on time. In the kitchen, Mara kneaded dough, humming quietly, something she only did when she felt safe. Now and then he passed by, picking up firewood or asking, "Need anything?" "No, thank you," she said, eyes fixed on her work. But every time he walked past, the air seemed to change. Not warmer, not colder, just aware. Near midnight, after the last dish was cleaned and the lamps dimmed, Mara reached for the kettle. She didn't notice the boiling water spilling over her hand. "Ah!" she gasped, dropping the ladle. Before she could move, Grant was there. He caught her wrist and pulled her toward the light. "Let me see." "It's fine." He didn't listen. His calloused fingers brushed over the red skin before he grabbed a cloth, dipped it in the cool basin, and pressed it gently to her burn. Steam rose between them, carrying the scent of ash and metal. "You've got to be more careful," he said quietly. "I'm used to it," she answered, forcing a shaky smile. He met her eyes. "Just because you're used to pain doesn't mean you should keep it." She didn't speak, Her gaze dropped to his hands, broad, scarred, steady, holding hers with a gentleness that disarmed her completely. Outside, the wind hissed through the shingles. Inside, the lamplight flickered, throwing soft gold over their faces. A drop of water fell from the towel to the floor, breaking the silence like a breath. Grant released her hand. "Better now." "Thank you," she murmured. He nodded and turned away. But even after his shadow melted into the lamplight, Mara found herself still standing there, her hand warm, her chest unsteady. That first night he stayed. They worked side by side, two quiet souls, each carrying their own wounds. And from that single, fleeting touch, something in the air of Hollow Creek began to change. Not loud, not sudden, but slow and certain, as two hearts learned how to draw closer through silence and through a burn that had yet to cool. Spring came with warm winds, yet the air in Hollow Creek carried a bitter dryness, like grass that wouldn't burn but still crackled underfoot. Before the sun even climbed over the hills, whispers had already slipped through open windows, floating down porches and dusty rooftops. They say that black cook at the sundown saloon and the new manager, the tall, quiet one, that's him, working late nights together. Sure doesn't sound like just cooking to me. Words didn't have to be loud to cut deep. Mara walked the main street each morning, a basket of eggs in hand, eyes fixed on the ground. But she could feel them. The stares that followed from the general store, from porches where women stitched their gossip into fabric, from men lighting cigarettes as she passed. Those eyes no longer looked through her. They looked at her, curious, judging, half pity, half scorn. In the saloon kitchen, she moved more quietly than usual. When Grant came in, she simply nodded, never meeting his eyes. He didn't ask, didn't press, only worked beside her, as though he could sense the air had changed between them. One afternoon, As she stepped out back for firewood, someone blocked the door. Widow Miriam, the oldest woman in town, her face carved deep by time, her eyes pale but sharp as cut glass. "Child," she said, "I know you mean well, but a woman like you isn't enough for a man like him." Mara froze, the firewood slipping from her hand. "I don't understand." "You do," the widow said, shaking her head. "Don't make yourself suffer. Men like him, they pass through. They don't stay." Mara said nothing. Her lips trembled, but no words came. When the widow turned away, the wind caught her apron, and her eyes burned like smoke. That night, she didn't bring Grant his usual cup of tea. She took off her apron, wrapped herself in a thin coat, and walked straight to her rented room behind the blacksmith's shop. Her figure disappeared into the mist, leaving the saloon hollow and still. Grant Holloway sat at the counter, a ledger open before him, though he wasn't reading. Every few minutes, he glanced toward the back door, listening for her soft steps. Nothing came. Only the whistle of the wind through the cracks. When the last lamp flickered out, he was still there, restless, his silence heavy with all the words he hadn't said. By dawn, Mara returned, basket of fresh bread in hand, eyes tired but steady. She tried to slip around to the back, but Grant was already standing at the door, sleeves rolled up, hair tousled. "Did you sleep?" he asked, voice low and rough. "I did," she lied, not meeting his gaze. He studied her for a moment before speaking. "The spring jubilee's this week. Glay said the saloon was invited to serve food. I want you to come with me." She blinked. "Me? No need. You can—" "No," he interrupted, quiet but firm. "I want you there. If the Ultimahone town's going to talk, we'll give them something worth talking about." She stiffened. "You want to prove something?" "No," he said, his eyes steady on hers. "I just want them to see the truth." Silence filled the room, thicker than any sound. Mara tightened her grip on the basket, fingers trembling slightly. "You don't understand," she said softly. "I'm not like them. I don't have anywhere to go if this goes wrong." Grant nodded slowly. "I understand more than you think." He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, the faint scent of wood smoke clinging to his shirt. "You've been running all your life just to find a place to belong," he said. "Don't let them chase you out again." Mara lifted her gaze. Morning light filtered through the window, catching in his gray eyes. Calm, unwavering, like ground before a storm. "You're very calm," she whispered. "It's not calm," he said. "It's knowing what's worth holding on to." Her breath caught. He didn't touch her. Didn't need to. The wind slipped between them, carrying the scent of coffee and warm bread. In that moment, Mara knew, fear or not, she couldn't say no. Because when Grant said "we," it wasn't about defiance or pride. It was something deeper, the quiet promise of a man who had chosen to stay. The sound of a fiddle tangled with the stomp of boots on wooden planks. Spring had come alive in Hollow Creek, spilling its warmth into the town square, bright, loud, and shimmering. Strings of paper lanterns swung in the breeze, casting a golden, honeyed glow over rows of stalls. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Children darted between wagons, and the scent of baked pies drifted through the air like a promise. Mara Ellison stood at the edge of it all, her copper-brown dress catching the light, palms damp with sweat. She had almost refused Grant's invitation, but he'd said, "If they're going to look, let them see what's right." And so she came. Now, in the middle of the crowd's noise, she could feel eyes on her again, curious, judging, whispering. Each glance cut like a dry reed snapping in the wind. Beside her, Grant Holloway looked almost unrecognizable. Clean shirt, black silk neckerchief, the calm of a man who didn't need to speak to be noticed. When he moved through the crowd, people stepped aside. And when he stopped beside Mara, the music itself seemed to hesitate. "You sure about this?" she murmured. "More sure when they're watching," he replied. She gave a nervous smile. "And if they laugh? Then we keep dancing." A drumbeat rolled through the air. The rhythm quickened, bold and bright. Grant held out his hand. "May I?" She looked up at him, saw steadiness, not demand, and placed her hand in his. As Grant drew her into the waltz, the world tilted. Her skirt brushed his trousers, his palm steady at her back, not pressing, not claiming, just there, solid as the earth beneath them. They moved beneath the lanterns, spinning through laughter and light, like two people lost inside a dream too fragile to name. Then a voice sliced through the crowd. "Well, well, if it isn't Grant Holloway." The sound cracked the moment in two. Grant froze, eyes darkening. Mara turned. The woman approaching wore blush-pink satin, white lace at her collar, and gloves too fine for a place like this. Leah Hastings, the fiancée who had left him. Mara's chest tightened. The woman didn't spare her a glance. Her gaze was fixed on Grant, the smile on her lips sharp as glass. "I see you still know how to draw a crowd," she said evenly, "and still pick the right sort of company to do it." Her eyes flicked over Mara, quick, slicing, cruel. Mara lowered her gaze, about to pull her hand free, but Grant's fingers tightened, gentle, certain. "Evening, Leah," he said, voice calm. "What brings you here?" "Business out west. Heard you'd settled in these parts. Thought I'd say hello." "Consider it said." His tone was so steady that Mara had to look up at him. Leah hesitated, then smiled, brittle as frost. "Enjoy your evening, Mr. Holloway. I hope she knows what kind of man she's dancing with." She turned, leaving behind a trail of perfume and silence so thick it swallowed the music. Mara tried again to step back, but Grant held firm. "Don't let her take this night from you," he said quietly. "Look at me." She did. The lantern light burned in his gray eyes, and in that instant, no one else existed. "Just pretending," he murmured, his voice low, almost touching her skin. "Unless you want more." Her breath caught. The air between them pulsed, warm, alive, trembling. "Maybe I do," she whispered. He drew her closer. The music spun on, fading into the blur of their own heartbeat. Around them, laughter dulled, the lights shimmered, and fabric brushed fabric in a rhythm older than words. They turned once more, slow and sure, until the lanterns above swayed like stars. When the festival ended and the crowd thinned, lanterns still glowed along the road, floating low like fallen constellations. Mara walked beside Grant in silence, the night soft around them, the earth beneath still warm from the day. At the saloon door, he opened it for her. They stepped inside where the world fell quiet again. He turned, his gaze deep as river water. "Mara," he said softly, Tonight, we don't have to pretend. She didn't answer. She simply stepped forward, closing the space between them until their breath mingled. His hand rose, lifting her chin, and the kiss came slow, as if both feared breaking something fragile. No storm, no rush. Just two souls once left behind, finding warmth in each other at last. Moonlight spilled over his shirt, pooling on the wooden floor, and their shadows melted into one. Somewhere in the hush of Hollow Creek, even the wind seemed to hold its breath, because tonight, no one was pretending anymore. Dawn spilled over Hollow Creek in a light soft as milk, seeping through the curtains and painting pale streaks across the rumpled blanket. Outside, a horse's hooves echoed faintly down the road, and a lone crow called the morning awake. In the small room above the saloon, the air still held the scent of lamp smoke and warm wood from the stove below. Mara Ellison woke first. She lay still for a moment, eyes open, tracing the slow crawl of sunlight along the wall. Beside her, Grant Holloway slept, one arm resting heavy across the blanket between them. His face, usually drawn tight by restraint, looked strangely peaceful now, his breathing steady, the corner of his mouth curved slightly, as if dreaming of something rare and gentle. She sat up quietly, wrapping the sheet around her shoulders. Her hair fell loose over her back, a little tangled. The silence was so deep she could hear her own heartbeat. She didn't regret a thing, not a single breath, not a single moment. But fear crept in nonetheless, the kind of fear that comes to those who've once lost everything by trusting too much. Sunlight slid over his chest, tracing the lean lines of muscle, the faint scars of work and years. Mara bit her lip, trying to steady her breath. Barefoot, she crossed to the window. The rooftops outside glistened with dew, sparrows huddled under the eaves. Morning had come as though nothing had changed, but she knew better. "You're up early." His voice, low and rough from sleep, broke the quiet. She turned. Grant had propped himself up on one arm, the blanket falling to his waist. His eyes, half-lidded and soft, found her easily. "Couldn't sleep," she said quietly. "Regretting it?" She shook her head. "No, just afraid." He tilted his head. "Of what?" "That maybe what happened last night wasn't real." Silence stretched between them, fine as a wire pulled taut. Grant looked at her for a long time, then asked softly, "Still pretending?" Mara gave a faint, trembling smile. "I don't know anymore." She stepped closer to the bed, standing in a shaft of light that crowned her shoulders with gold. Grant reached out, calloused fingers brushing the tips of hers. The touch was simple, unhurried, yet in it lay everything neither of them had yet said. "I don't know what tomorrow looks like," he murmured, "but I don't want to walk away from this." Mara's gaze deepened, dark as still water. "Then don't." He pulled her gently toward him. The kiss was soft, hesitant, more gratitude than desire, more peace than fire. No urgency, no storm. Only two people who had known too much loss, finding in each other something that felt like home. When they finally rose, the sky had turned bright. Grant buttoned his shirt slowly. Mara tied her hair back. He caught her looking, and they both laughed. Light, awkward, genuine. "We're opening late," he said, slinging his coat over his shoulder. "We?" she teased. He smiled, one corner of his mouth lifting. Glay left the place to both of us. She stepped closer to fix his collar. You're not exactly the social kind. I can learn, he said, and before she could answer, he bent and kissed her forehead, brief but steady enough to make her pulse stumble again. They walked down the narrow stairs together. Morning sunlight poured through the saloon doors, glinting off the floorboards. Mara unlatched the bolts. Grant straightened the chairs and lit the lamps. Neither spoke. Only the faint sigh of wind through the cracks, the creak of hinges, the rhythm of two people moving in quiet harmony. Outside, Hollow Creek had come alive. Horses clattering, the church bell tolling, children shouting down the street. But inside the sundown saloon, the air stayed soft and calm, as if the noise of the world were only backdrop to something smaller, truer. The beginning of two souls who no longer knew what it meant to pretend. As the first light touched the worn wooden table, Grant looked at her and asked, his voice low, "Ready?" Mara nodded. Always. And together they opened the door. Sunlight flooded in, warm, bright, and new, like the first morning ever made. By late afternoon, the sky over Hollow Creek turned faster than a man's mood. Clouds rolled in from the west, black and molten as iron. The wind swept over rooftops, stirring red dust into furious spirals. Down in the square, merchants shuttered their stalls and hurried home before the storm could break. Inside the sundown saloon, Mara Ellison was stacking supplies when the first thunder rolled, long, low, and deep as something pulled from the earth itself. She turned toward the window. The hanging sign outside was already swinging wild. The lantern strings whipped in the wind. "Oh, Lord," she breathed. Grant Holloway came in from the back, rain soaking his shoulders. "Storm's moving fast. Back window's loose. I'll get it shut." He had barely finished when the sound of hooves echoed through the storm, frantic, uneven. Mara ran to the porch, peering through the blur of rain. At the far end of the street, a young white colt struggled in the rising flood, its reins caught on a broken fence post. It kicked and cried, half submerged. "Grant!" she shouted. "It's Doyle's colt! It's trapped! Don't go out there!" he barked. But she was already gone. She threw off her apron and dashed into the storm. The cold rain bit her skin. The road that was dust yesterday had become a wild river, churning against her legs. She clung to the fence, inching forward through the rushing water. "Shh, shh, easy now," she whispered, voice trembling. "It's all right. Easy." Her fingers brushed the reins. Then the ground gave way. The current yanked her down. She cried out, but the wind swallowed her voice. Grant was there in an instant, plunging into the torrent without thought. He caught her by the waist, pulling hard until his boots found gravel beneath. Water slammed against them, mud choking their breath, but he didn't let go. "Hold on to me," he shouted. Her hands clutched his shoulders, nails digging through his drenched shirt. Together they stumbled toward the saloon steps, slipping twice, battered by branches and grit. At last, strong arms from the porch reached down, neighbors who had run to help, and dragged them up to safety. Grant collapsed on the boards, chest heaving. Mara coughed hard, rain and tears mingling until she couldn't tell which was which. She turned to him, his shirt torn, his breath ragged, his eyes open and fixed on her. Alive, wild, real. "You!" she gasped, half laughing, half crying. "You're out of your mind." "Maybe," he said, smiling weakly. But at least we're still here. Rain poured around them, sharp and relentless. She knelt beside him, trembling, her wet hair clinging to her face. From the porch light, a soft gold spread across the silver curtain of rain. She raised a shaking hand, touching his cheek. Her fingers burned from the cold, yet his skin was warm beneath them. "Are we still pretending?" she whispered, her voice fragile but louder than the storm. Grant didn't answer right away. He caught her hand, pressed it to his chest, where his heartbeat thundered, uneven but certain. His gaze steadied on hers, deep and calm, like ground after lightning. "Not since the moment you said my name," he murmured. Their breath met, and the rain fell around them like ribbons of silver. She bent toward him, and their lips found each other. Not desperate, not claiming, just a quiet meeting between two souls who had been wandering too long. The kiss was brief, tender, but real enough to make the storm fade to nothing. Around them, the world blurred into rhythm, the hammer of rain on the roof, the rush of water below. Yet in the center of it all lay a stillness so pure it silenced everything else. Grant rested his forehead against hers, his breath still unsteady. "You all right?" She nodded, a weak smile breaking through her soaked face. "As long as you're here." He squeezed her hand, and together they looked up at the clearing sky. The thunder had softened, the rain easing into steady drops. From the roof, the runoff dripped in a slow, peaceful rhythm, like a heartbeat finally finding rest. That night, when Hollow Creek slept under the spent storm, Mara lay in his arms, listening to the last of the rain tapping gently on the porch. She knew then, soon, there would be no more pretending, because love, even when it came in a storm, had become the safest place she had ever known. Morning broke over Hollow Creek with a strange kind of silence. No rain, no wind, only the deep groan of water draining beneath the earth and the smell of soaked mud thick in the air. The sun rose weakly, as if the town itself had just woken from a long fever dream. Mara Ellison pushed open the saloon door. The hinges moaned. The wood was swollen and heavy. Inside, the water had receded, leaving streaks of dried mud on the floorboards and chairs overturned in muddy disarray. She stood there for a long moment, taking it all in, then drew a slow breath and rolled up her sleeves. "Let's start," she said quietly. Behind her, Grant Holloway came in carrying a bucket and a rag. He didn't speak, only nodded. Since dawn, they had been out helping the townsfolk, hauling debris, fixing fences, pulling what could be saved from the flood. Now, back in the place that had become their home, Grant felt one clear truth. They had survived together. Sunlight filtered through the cracked window, striking the dirt-smudged curve of Mara's cheek. She smiled, tired but shining. Grant watched her, and for the first time, his gaze didn't turn away, didn't hide. She caught it, looked down quickly, but her cheeks flushed pink all the same. By noon, a few neighbors stopped by to lend a hand. Mrs. Trudell from the fabric shop brought a basket of bread, setting it on the counter. "Thank you both," she said. "If it weren't for Mr. Holloway pulling that rope, those kids would have been swept away." Grant nodded, his smile faint. Mara only managed to murmur thanks, dusting off her apron as if the praise didn't belong to her. A man passing the door called out, "Good job, Miss Ellison." Mara froze. Miss Ellison. She looked up, startled. Not the cook, not that girl. For the first time, her name had been spoken without pity or disdain, only with simple, human respect. Grant saw her standing still, eyes bright. He walked over, handed her a clean rag. "You've got mud on your face," he said softly. She laughed, the sound catching slightly in her throat. "Did you hear that?" "I did," he said. "It sounded real good." By late afternoon, sunlight slanted across the porch, glinting off the puddles that still lingered. A wagon pulled up out front. Mr. Glay stepped down, his coat dusty, his face drawn with worry. "Good heavens," he muttered. "I leave for a few weeks and the whole place nearly washes away." But when he stepped inside and saw the saloon, floors scrubbed, chairs upright, people laughing as they passed by to thank Grant, he stopped, blinking. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, half moved, half amused. "Not bad, Holloway. I thought all you knew how to do was scowl." Grant smiled. "Scowling works fine if you've got someone beside you who knows how to smile." Glay's eyes flicked to Mara, then he chuckled. "Ah, I see how it is." That evening, the three of them sat together, the sunset. Lamps burned low, soft and amber. Outside, crickets sang their first tune since the storm. Mara poured tea into 2 chipped porcelain cups. Glay sipped his, then spoke quietly. "I think it's time I sell this place," he said. "I've done enough. My mother needs me back east." Mara looked up sharply. "Sell it?" Grant glanced at her, saying nothing. "Yeah," Glay said, nodding. "This town needs younger hands, folks with strength and heart. I don't know if anyone's got both, but maybe someone does." After tea, Glay went to bed. The night had settled calm and clear. Grant stayed behind at the counter, turning the ledger's worn pages. Moonlight spilled through the window, silvering the last few drops of rain clinging to the glass. His hand stopped on a line of ink. Sundown Saloon. He thought of the morning voices calling Miss Ellison, of her smile through the mud, of the way her hand had rested on his shoulder as they lifted the tables together. "This is home," he thought. "Not just mine, ours." Before dawn, he slipped out. When Mara came downstairs, she found a folded note on the counter, written in his neat, deliberate hand. "Went to see the lawyer. Don't worry." She held the note to her chest. She didn't know what he was doing, but in the quiet he left behind, there was something steady and warm, like a promise carried in the morning breeze. At the small law office near the edge of town, Grant signed his name at the bottom of a deed for Sundown Saloon. No announcements, no boasting. He tucked the papers inside his coat and stepped out into the sunlight. The earth smelled clean again, washed and reborn. He pictured Mara's face when she found out, her wide eyes, the tremor in her voice when she'd ask, "Why would you do this?" And he knew exactly what he'd say. "Because now I know where I belong." Hollow Creek, scrubbed of mud and sorrow, was waking back to life. And somewhere in the quiet hearts of 2 people who had once stood alone, something had begun to grow, strong, silent, and true. Afternoon settled slow over Hollow Creek. Sunlight thin as worn linen draped across roofs still drying from the flood. Inside the Sundown Saloon, the air carried the faint scent of wet wood and brewing tea, a fragile calm after too much storm. Mara Ellison was polishing glasses when the door swung open. A middle-aged man in a dust-coated wool coat stepped inside. "Pardon," he said. "I'm looking for Mr. Grant Holloway. I've got a letter from the East." Grant had ridden out that morning to help rebuild Doyle's stables. Mara looked up with a small, polite smile. "He's not here right now, but I can take it for him." The man nodded, pulling a thick envelope sealed with red wax from his bag. The handwriting on the corner made her heart stop. From Mrs. Leah Hastings, Philadelphia. Her breath caught. The name cut through her like a small, sharp blade. "She told me to say," the courier added carefully, "that her offer still stands. Said to tell him not to wait until it's too late to change his mind." Mara took the letter, her fingers trembling around the paper. She forced a smile, thanked the man, and stood in silence long after the sound of his horse faded down the street. The room was empty again. Only the wind moved through the curtains, carrying the dry scent of earth and the slow chill of something unnamed. She looked down at the envelope. Elegant handwriting, black ink steady and graceful. The woman who had once left him now wrote to bring him back. She thought of Grant, of the way he had looked at her through the rain, the way he'd said, "Not since the moment you said my name." Suddenly, every word felt fragile, every memory too soft to trust. A faint thud startled her. She turned and saw Glay's old ledger fallen open on the counter. The ink on the page blurred slightly from water damage, but she could still make out the words. "If I sell the saloon sooner than planned, I'll let you know." Sell the saloon. The phrase landed heavy, cold. She didn't know what Grant had arranged, what promises he'd made in her absence. Maybe he hadn't told her everything. Maybe men never did. The thought grew like a slow ache, familiar, unwelcome. By dusk, the sky had gone red and raw, like an old wound reopened. Mara slid the letter into a drawer and pulled out something else, a worn handkerchief with a crooked blue flower stitched in one corner, the one he'd given her the night of the rain. The thread had faded, but it still smelled faintly of smoke and him. She folded it carefully, set it on the counter, and wrote a few words on a scrap of paper. "You gave me safety. That's enough." She tucked the note beneath an empty teacup, a farewell that needed no envelope, no address. Outside, the wind began to rise again. She slipped on her thin coat and looked around one last time. Every chair, every slant of lamplight carried his shape, a quiet presence, steady and kind, but perhaps never meant to stay. She walked to the door and didn't look back. The street glistened damp beneath her boots, the sound of water still trickling through the drains. At the far end of the road, the glow from the old tavern blurred in the fog. She pulled her collar higher and kept walking until only the wind followed her. When Grant returned, it was late. He pushed through the door, smiling, his voice light with rain. "Mara? Brought some apples from Doyle's farm." No answer. Only the hollow hush of a room left behind. He called again, louder, stepping into the kitchen. The stove was cold. Then he saw the handkerchief, and beside it, the note. He stood there a long time, the silence thick around him, until even the lamps seemed to dim. Outside, a drizzle began, soft and thin, the kind that chilled more than it soaked. Grant left the saloon and went searching, down the muddy road, past shuttered windows and darkened shops. No one had seen her. One man said he thought he'd glimpsed a woman walking toward the stables at dusk. Grant ran. Mud clung to his boots, his breath ragged. He called her name into the fog. "Mara!" Again and again, the sound tearing through the night. No one answered. Only the wind carried his voice away, scattering it into the darkness. Somewhere beyond that fog, She was walking in the opposite direction, carrying silence and a heart stitched with cracks. And he, standing in the empty road beneath a lightless sky, was left with nothing but the echo of her name and the rain beginning to fall. The storm that night was small, not enough to wash away the town, but enough to take the woman he loved. The wind cut across the barren land like a blade. Dust rose in heavy spirals, swallowing the horizon. The sun beat down on the cracked plains, searing and breathless, the last gasp of a long, dry summer. Grant Holloway rode his gray horse through miles of scorched gold. His coat was stiff with grit, his lips cracked from wind and thirst. He didn't count the days, nor the miles. All he knew was that somewhere beyond these dust-choked roads, Mara Ellison was walking alone, and he would not stop until he found her. He stopped at an old post office, a church, a roadside diner run by an old Apache couple. No one had seen her. Each time someone said, "Maybe she went south," he tightened the reins and rode harder. The sun burned. His sweat turned to salt on his skin. On the fifth evening, as dusk painted the hills violet, he saw a wooden sign half buried in dust. Haven Diner, meals served hot. The diner sat on the edge of a small town called Dry Hollow, 30 miles from Hollow Creek. Grant dismounted, heart hammering. Through the open door, he saw a woman shoving between the tables. Hair pinned up, apron neat, a tray balanced in her hands. She leaned down to show a young waitress how to steady her grip. Every motion, the tilt of her shoulders, the soft tone of her voice, felt achingly familiar. Grant stepped inside. The bell above the door chimed. Mara turned. The world stopped. She froze, eyes wide, the tray trembling in her hands. "Grant," she whispered, as if afraid the name might vanish if spoken too loud. He walked toward her, neither fast nor slow. The evening light streamed in behind him, catching the dust on his shoulders, turning his weary eyes to silver. "You've gone too far," he said, voice rough with travel. "I thought—" She swallowed hard. "I thought you chose to go back." He shook his head, his jaw tightening. "I only went back to find you." He reached into his saddlebag and laid a folded stack of papers on the wooden table between them. The ink was clear, official. Deed of ownership, Sundown Saloon, Grant Holloway. She stared at it, stunned. "You bought it?" He nodded. "Not to keep for myself. To ask you this." He slid the papers toward her, his voice low and steady. "Would you be the lady of the Sundown Saloon?" It wasn't a proposal with a ring or a kneeling man, but it was truer than any vow he could have spoken. Mara brought her hand to her mouth, tears spilling silently. "You did all this for me?" "No," he said, his gaze soft but unyielding. "For us, because you were never meant to be just passing through." Her composure broke. She stepped closer, caught his hand in both of hers, gripping tight. "I thought you'd let me go." "I did," he murmured. "But my heart didn't." They stood in the quiet room, the scent of sugar and coffee lingering in the air. Outside, the wind carried golden dust through the window, glittering like old memories returning home. Mara looked up, her dark eyes glimmering, the tears catching the light like dawn after storm. "Grant," she whispered, a prayer more than a word. "I never pretended to love you." He bent his head, resting his lips against her forehead. "I know," he said softly, "because you never learned how to pretend." She laughed through her tears, pressing her face into his shoulder. Beyond the window, the wind calmed, and the diner bell tinkled again, small and gentle, reminding them that life was waiting and that the road to Hollow Creek still smelled faintly of rain. "Let's go home," he said. "Home?" she echoed. He smiled. "Where there's an old wooden table, a small stove, and the woman who cooks better than anyone I know." She smiled through her tears. "Then let's go." When they stepped out, the sun was melting into the horizon, bathing the plains in a red-gold glow. Mara looked back once, at the diner, at the girl cleaning the tables, at the faint smoke curling from the chimney. She realized this place had never been home, only a stop on the road to finding herself again. Grant reached for her hand, rough, scarred, steady, and she took it. Together they walked toward the open road, dust swirling around them, the air warm and clear. "You were never just pretending," he said quietly. "Neither were you," she answered. And the road ahead, long and dusty as it was, had finally become the road home. Dawn returned to Hollow Creek, no longer the harsh blaze of dry summer, but a golden softness, like honey spilling through the wooden windows of the sundown saloon, stretching across the familiar floorboards. The air smelled of coffee and warm bread. The clink of spoons against porcelain, the hiss of butter melting on a pan, small, steady sounds, the rhythm of a place that had known pain and was learning, slowly, how to live again. Mara Ellison stood by the stove, her hair neatly tied, apron dark with flour, her face bright under the morning light. She stirred the simmering pot and smiled when she heard hooves outside. She didn't need to look. She knew. The door opened. Grant Holloway stepped in, shirt dusted from the road, leather jacket slung over one shoulder, reins still in hand. The scent of wind clung to him. "Beautiful day," he said, voice low, rasped by the dawn chill. "It is," she replied softly. "The town's up early. I heard someone new's looking for work." He grinned, leaning toward the stove. "Word is the woman running this saloon's a hard one to please. Probably because of the man she married," she said, lips curving. He didn't argue. He moved behind her, his hand brushing her shoulder as he bent to breathe in the scent of fresh bread. "And what about the lady of the place?" She pretended to frown. "The lady just wants her guests fed hot, and the man making coffee not skipping out on his shift." Grant chuckled, that deep, warm sound that always found its way to her chest. His arms circled her waist, not tightly, just enough that she leaned into him. The light from the window caught them both, their shadows merging against the old wooden wall, the shapes of two people who had once been lost, now quietly home. By mid-morning, the saloon came alive. Mara set trays of bread and honey on the counter. The hum of voices rose, laughter, chairs scraping, familiar greetings. Folks no longer called her the cook. They called her Mrs. Holloway. She stood in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron, her gaze sweeping over the room. The tables gleamed, the curtains were new, the walls freshly painted. Miners ate their breakfast. Two children shared a loaf of honey bread in the corner. Behind the counter, Grant tallied the books, head bowed, sunlight glinting across his hair. Mara watched him, a slow smile spreading across her face. All that once hurt had settled into peace. Not loud, not grand, just steady, living peace. Grant looked up and caught her staring. He came toward her, pulling off his gloves. "You still pretending?" he asked. She tilted her head, her eyes glowing through the soft morning light. In them, he saw every storm they'd weathered, every loss they'd turned into something worth keeping. "Are you?" she answered. His reply came quiet, like a vow. "I don't remember how to pretend anymore." She laughed, gentle and real, and lifted her hand. Sunlight flashed on the thin gold band circling her finger, plain, unadorned, yet glowing against her warm skin. A small thing, but proof enough that two people who once sought only safety had chosen something greater, to stay, to begin. Grant took her hand, rough fingers lacing through hers. Amid the clatter and chatter, they stood still a moment, watching through the window as the wind carried the scent of bread, of earth, of everything that meant home. "Home," Mara whispered. "Always," he answered. Outside, the sun rose higher, spilling over the saloon roof, the red dirt road, and the two figures standing by the counter, hands joined, shadows one. No more pretending, no more running. Only a morning quiet and kind, where two souls who had once lost their way finally chose and found each other. If this story reminded you of someone who once held your hand through the quiet years, leave a comment, or simply to let us know you still believe in love. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for the next tale, where the wind still roams the west and hearts still find their way home.